After 3 consecutive guests have talked about the value that they got from n8n, I hit my breaking point. I just had to try it. But the thing is, I didn't want to go in blind. I wanted to find the best person I could to teach me about n8n before I actually used it, and I'm going to bring you along for the journey. So in episode 64 of Tool Use, I'm joined by Richardson Dackam. He's a founder and an AI builder, and he's hosted n8n masterclasses before. So today he's going to cover why every developer should consider using n8n, some great use cases to really save you a lot of time, and some pitfalls and gotchas that you need to look out for.
So n8n is essentially like an open source workflow automation builder. Its advantages is that you cannot create like workflow, and it was designed with developer in mind. So like you can actually see some JSON output. You can even edit the response. You can add code to it. So it's pretty intuitive. So not just developer can use it, but it really gives people that know how to code the ability to do even more complex stuff. And on top of that, because it's open source, it has a pretty big community, and you can build custom nodes. So if you take something like Zapier, for example, if there's a feature that you want to have on it that is not there yet, you will have to wait for Zapier to build it. But on something like n8n, the community can build it, or you can even hire a developer to build custom node for you. So that's flexibility is what makes it special.
That's so cool. And I mean, we were talking before, I've been a software developer for 10 years, big in open source too, but there's something about this drag and drop interface that I just didn't really like. I like the idea to code everything, control everything, have transparency all the way down. But more and more developers are saying the same thing, where there's like, it abstracts away the integration work, a lot of the drudgery with this job of trying to make systems talk to each other. So
Yes.
who else gets to benefit from this?
So anyone that has like a workflow within the company that they would like to automate. So you take a task and you think about how you can make that task into a workflow that is repeatable, then you can really like take advantage of that. And it's powerful enough that you can create enough like systems to replace an entire department, even in your company. So some people have built a really complex workflow that take care of the whole thing, especially when you combine that with AI that can be the decision maker, then it gives you a lot of power to do like really complex automation.
What are some common or popular workflows that people will automate on n8n?
So like a common one will be automating emails management. So like, let's say even for refund, if you're getting a refund and you, instead of hiring someone that is going to go through the email, parse them, label them, you can use a workflow to do that. So what you do, you first think in steps, like what happened in every single step, and you're thinking input, output. So what's coming in and what's coming out. So then you can take something like an email, you can say, read my email, find any email that mention refund, label them refund, and then write a response to the customer based on this set of criteria. So email management is a big one. Customer support is a really big one as well. Social media management is really big. It's getting bigger and bigger because you can automate posting into across multiple social networks. Especially when you have like, people making content on YouTube and they want that same content to appear on TikTok and, all the other platforms. So you can use n8n to actually automate that entire social media posting.
I definitely need to start looking into this more because I'm manually posting a lot of cross-platform stuff. But let's hone in on just the email example, just try to give people a little more inspiration as to what they can build. So I hesitate having AI write emails because I don't know what the quality is like. Is it going to match my tone? So can we get through a little granular? How do we get human in the loop? How do we kind of set the AI for tone? Does it have to be a certain LLM? Like how do we get that workflow more polished?
Yeah, so the thing that you just mentioned, human in the loop is a big one. You can have a human verifying a step before it's submitted. So you can actually be part of that workflow as human in the loop. The other thing you can do is for having templates. So for a lot of work operation workflow, oftentimes you can just simplify them into templates because it's oftentimes similar responses. So you can have pre-written template that you just use inside of the tool and just add or update the variable that you want to edit inside of that template. And that's why it gives you the consistency of what to expect, which is good for brands and tones because you don't want the language of your brand to change based on every single response, right? So I think templates is like a really good go-to.
Nice. And for the aspect of templates, I actually had Lee Russell on a couple episodes ago, and we were talking about the idea of when you just customize the user's name, hi, first name, it's kind of expected now. It's not really that magical experience. Can
Mhm.
you have it where along with this template, you actually will have something more custom? So let's say like hi first name and then a paragraph related to their specific instance and then the generic template. Does that work?
Yes, this is where stuff that workflow that use AI comes into place, because now you can take a portion of the input being, for example, the job of the person, the position, or something that they've accomplished, and have AI customize that intro section specifically for the person that's going to receive the email. So you can actually make it more custom by having AI deciding how to rewrite those different parts.
Okay, cool. And for the AI, do you have to use OpenAI? Could you have different? Is it just like an API call? How do you actually plug an AI into the system?
So it's pretty flexible. So it gives you access to different type of AI models that you can use. So you can use anywhere from Grok to Anthropic, Google, Gemini. There's so many now. So you can use any of those tools in it, and it gives you the ability and flexibility to choose what AI model you want to use. And the way you do it is you go on Anthropic, for example, which is the one that built cloud, and then you take your API key and you add it inside of your n8n credentials, and then you can now use that model specifically for one node or different node that you're adding to it. So yeah, you can bring in different AI models as based on your need. You're not limited to a single one, and you can even use custom one if you use something like Olama, which is something that a lot of developers like to use, or open routers and stuff like that.
And sorry, how would that work? Set a custom API URL and just point it towards my server, and then just like regular request response.
Exactly, and or like if you're using open router, then you have even more flexibility because they have such a large database of models, so you can pick different model that you want to use.
And kind of leaning back to human in the loop, I think it's super important to be able to keep people informed as to what they're doing and insight as to what's happening. Observability in general is a concern when using systems like this, because if a pipeline is just running, it's in the background, maybe there's a step along the way causes an error, and by the time it reaches human in the loop, it's already cascaded. Do you have any advice or strategies on how, if someone uses n8n, they can get better observability, logging, tracing into the process?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because error logging is a thing that a lot of people that begin to use n8n always forget to do. So you can actually like making sure to have node to just handle errors and how to deal with errors and where you want those errors to go to. So one way to handle that is if you're put a human in the loop, you can have some of the error going to the human in the loop to review them. Um, or you can have a send the log via email or through a platform. So me personally, for some of my tool, I like to build my own dashboard. So I will get these on my own dashboard that I can then review. And you can also send it to Slack, which is very common for a lot of companies. So they have all of those errors directly coming on Slack, and they know how to take action whenever those come in.
Is it possible? I'm just going to use Slack as an example. Error comes in, a human acknowledges it, they know the solution. Are you able to automatically have triggers from outside of n8n send information back in? So say I say like close ticket or respond with
Yeah,
whatever response. Can that be done in Slack and send back to n8n?
you have this thing called webhook that essentially are like listeners that can listen to event outside of n8n, and so that will be fit into the category of triggers. So n8n has like different type of triggers that you can have, like time based, that react to responses and so on. And so, for example, if you wanted to respond to event happening on Slack, it could be, for example, when I say yes, send an event to that webhook and take action based on that. So it will work usually as if it's a trigger as part of a workflow. As like they said, the beginning of the workflow, this is what happened. I haven't seen a lot of people using it as it being in the middle of a workflow itself. So usually it's more done as a trigger.
Okay, so custom triggers make a lot of sense. Love the idea of webhooks. It just allows you kind of percolate into any system, no matter how custom.
Yeah.
Can you kind of do similar thing webhooks on the other side, where n8n is able to notify a webhook when it's completed
Yes.
a task or stuck on a task?
So that's a very common use for notifications. Also, for example, people that want to use stuff like Telegram or WhatsApp, they can send a webhook to some of those platforms to get to submit something. Also, even with Typeform is a very common use with webhook. Also, you can receive the webhook there as well. And if you want to send it, you can use it to, for example, anytime a user take an action, you want them, for example, to get access to a form, you can also send an email. There's so many variability that you can do with that in and out.
Nice. And I kind of assuming it's yes, but I just want to make sure. Can it connect to databases? Like, can I have it actually write entries to a table?
Yes, so a lot of people connect even different type of databases. So yes, the answer is yes. Some people like to use Excel to keep it simple. Some people use like Superbase. You can also use Redis, like a cache database. Vector is a really big use case if you're using AI, because in n8n there's this thing called clusters that are often built for reusability. So they will have the cluster connected to a vector database if you need to, like, store some information and process for making it easier for the AI to have memory, essentially.
Sorry, could you go into detail? What is a cluster?
So a cluster is kind of like a group that make an action reusable inside of n8n. There's different type of cluster. Like you can have like a chat cluster that essentially is composed of an AI model, how the AI model is going to get the message, a database, which is where the memory is going to be stored. So instead of having to build every single different component yourself, you have that cluster that have everything already pre-built and ready to use. And they just make it a lot faster to build more complex nodes. So that's something that a lot of pro tend to use, is because it makes things a lot faster than having to set up everything from scratch.
Yeah, so instead of regular atomic units, you have this group, a cluster to plug and play.
Yes.
Does the community develop clusters? Like, is there like a library I can go to and be like, oh, this matches my use case? Insert.
So that's optional. I'm not sure, but usually what I see when I see community contribution is usually nodes. I've personally used a lot of nodes from the community. I haven't seen cluster. I haven't had the need to use cluster, so I'm not 100% sure.
So this is sounding really exciting. I love the idea of being able to just automate a lot of workflows. But I imagine as people start exploring this technology for the first time, myself included, there's going to be mistakes. What type of common mistakes do you see people make? And when they make these mistakes, what's the debugging process like?
I would say, like, one of the most common mistakes is approaching n8n as like just like making tasks. So thinking of tasks instead of thinking of flow, because it's very important to think about the information that comes in. So one way I like to put it, to visualize it, is it's kind of like they're like kind of like Lego with data, right? So every time you connect one Lego to the other one, you're passing the data to the other Lego, and then as you're doing that, you're kind of building this supply chain, or if I put it in the sense of like 4 assembly line, right? So every assembly line is getting different data. So instead of making, let's say, your car, instead of making object, you're taking the data and passing it to the next thing. So a lot of people tend to think of n8n as just tasks, but it's really important to think about it as an assembly line where you're passing data from one end to the other, because this is what allows you to actually transform the information and the data and then get to an output. So I would say that's like probably one of the most common one.
And in terms of the pipeline aspect, the assembly line aspect, is there a lot of requirements for data transformation? If I have data coming in a certain format, do I have to go in between every node and map fields to each other, or is there any type of automation there?
Yes, you do. You have to map field. Sometimes what you do is you can, so it comes in a format called JSON, and then you can kind of like say that, for example, this node is going to output this different field, and on the next node you can grab the value from the input or the value from the response and pass that to where you're manipulating the data. So for example, if you want to add someone's input from a prompt inside it to an AI model, you will take that input and pass it to the AI model. When the AI model generates a response, you will use that response and pass it to the next node, and so on. So you can transfer the data that way with it.
Nice. And just for that process, do I need to know from either previous experience or other experiments what the data fields are, or will n8n display this is the output, this is the required input, like match things?
So there's 2 things. One, you can decide how you want the data to be outputted, which is very important. That's why I say you need to think about input and output, because you need to know how you want your data to be presented for the next node. And once you've created this preliminary, then the next node will know what data it can take in. And actually, this is a tangent, but Agent Builder by OpenAI actually do that really well. The way they allow you to visualize what comes in and what comes out, I think they did a really good job of that.
Is there, because you mentioned it's open source, so people will build their own nodes, I guess. Is there any work done on the interface? Like, do you think that n8n will catch up to OpenAI's agent builder in terms of UI?
It doesn't seem that that's their priority right now, because I was reading something that the CEO of n8n wrote. I think his name is Jen Obenheiser. Like, I have pronounced his name wrong, but technically what he said is that their vision is to build like the Excel of AI. So they really want to build something that people can use at the orchestration layer. So like they want to really focus on that orchestration layer, while OpenAI is really focused on building good products that are very easy to use. The other thing that they're going to do is they're going to add a way to generate workflow, and that's going to be purely for marketing purposes, in order to get more people to use n8n. But they're not really going to dive into that generation, but mostly to, if someone needs to quickly have a workflow inside of n8n, they'll use a prompt and write what they want to build, and they'll pre-set up the different nodes for them. So that's the current focus right now. And also because the target market is usually more technical, while Agent Builder is targeting the average consumer, the average consumer and companies. So like I don't think that they'll try to do something similar to OpenAI.
Pivoting slightly, you mentioned email's a good use case, writing to Excel or a database. Could you go over a few other like integrations, nodes, maybe some that aren't so popular that you found have actually been very helpful? Like what type of services should people keep in mind when they're setting up their workflows?
So something that people don't really think about is like RSS feed. A lot of people, for example, listen to podcasts. There's a lot of ways that you can utilize RSS feed, or for news or for podcasts. I think that's like a really interesting use case if you want to have like an agent that check your preferred news source all the time, or your preferred podcast. And if you want to only check the podcast you're actually interested in, you can have filters. So that's like a really like creative way to make it into your little AI robot that can like prepare the news for you and so on. The other one will be, form trigger is a common use case as well, but people don't usually see that they can use that for more than just form. You can do that as like a payment form as well, because you can have a form to take on payment, and you can have a webhook to respond to the Stripe webhook request. So you can actually build an entire payment system just from n8n. Oftentimes, like as a developer, the thing that brings me to use n8n is that if I think about a workflow that I could build into a website and want to quickly see how that would function, I will quickly build a prototype on n8n and see it working, and then it allow me to quickly test something and having an endpoint for someone else to utilize. So I could, for example, give that endpoint to my app if I wanted to do something complicated. I don't want to build full edge yet, but just create a quick note to see how it would work.
You're not the first person to bring up the idea of using it for prototyping. Do you find you'll hit a ceiling or a certain level of functionality where n8n is no longer appropriate, and then you take the concept and put it all into code? Or is there even a ceiling there?
There's a ceiling. So sometimes if your tasks, for example, involve like using browser AI agents or doing scraping or stuff that have to manipulate the browser, stuff like that, I think it's a lot easier to build it in code, because you mentioned observability early on, and that's like a really big factor. And I think that n8n sometimes lack observability because it doesn't show you the error right away. So it's sometimes easier to actually build that inside of like, in your own environment, cursor, or you name it, because then you'll be able to really see the error output and the debugging output. So if something gets too complex where being able to see the debugging log is important, I think I would say stay away from n8n. So if you can just like programmatically set up things and where the input and output are very clear, then it's a really easy tool to use to build quick prototypes.
Okay, cool. And that's good to know. And you had mentioned that there are some very complex workflows that exist. Do you have any advice on how people architect or lay out their n8n setup to help with maintainability? Where instead of just like a random cluster of nodes that can be overwhelming, yes, not knowing where what is, any way of like organizing or structuring, anything like that?
Yes, so you can think about, for example, there's stickers note that you can add, so where you can explain what different area or part of the workflow actually doing. Those are very common. It makes it also easier for you yourself when you're looking at your workflow after a while, because sometimes you may forget, what is this workflow doing again? Now, on social media, I've seen a lot of like images that tend to go viral of people creating these massive and then workflows that are very, very complicated. And I often see n8n commenting on it and say, have you ever heard of cluster, or have you ever heard of subnodes, So there's way to simplify it by looking at cluster nodes and looking at subnode. Sometimes subnode can allow you to do some of those stuff with a cluster.
Are there any other like meta nodes that don't necessarily help with functionality, but help with the developer experience? Because do you call them stickers, where the node that
Yes.
kind of just says something? Is there anything like that which doesn't impact the flow of the data, but helps me understand the workflow?
I guess one thing that you could do is updating the title of the node itself. That would be like the easiest go to. So making sure that the name of the node itself represent an action that it's actually doing. Let's say if it's deleting your email, you might say delete email or update emails. And one thing to keep in mind is that every single node takes a specific action. So you can have different nodes for those different actions, like update, delete, create. So it's really, when you're looking at your n8n board and you see your logo, if you don't specify the action, it can become very confusing really quickly. You'll just see Gmail, have no idea if it's reading, updating, or creating. So I would say combining the action with the name of the node are another ways to add clarity to your workflow.
I've recently heard n8n allows you to do natural language prompt to like to a workflow, but sometimes it needs some tweaking. Like it just gets you started. Have you played around with that yet?
I was going to say, to give you some background, the way I got into n8n was very unconventional. So I wanted to start learning how to use n8n, and I wanted a quick way to do it. And I realized that there weren't a tool where I could just write a prompt to use it. So I decided to build that tool. And on the process of building that tool, this is how I got to learn about how n8n works. And so from doing that, I started building more things, and then I started doing some small contract to better understand how it works. And it kind of went from that, and I went from building automation to building my own tool. It's kind of how I got into it.
That's so cool. For me, the best way to learn is just by doing. But if you do something
Sure.
even meta like that's awesome. One thing that it was almost like the tipping point that made me really interested in n8n was the ability to have nodes that run custom code. So could you walk through that at all? Like, is there limitations to what type of code? Could I have a full app running in there? Or is it just like scripts? Like, how does that process work?
Yeah, so usually they're mostly scripts, so you can build like really like a powerful script. And again, you have to keep in mind input and output. So you can write a script and say what is going to output. You can use, for example, a script in JavaScript and detect what that script is going to return. So it's also a very powerful way to use n8n, which actually a lot of developers like, because it gives you a lot of flexibility. From my personal experience, one of the things that frustrates me when doing that is, again, like the console and the log. I sometimes feel that I'm not getting enough like feedback or response. So one good thing is you might have to write your script somewhere else first and then bring it inside of n8n. That's something that I like to do. But yeah, it's a really cool way to add more customization to your workflow.
Have you done it personally? Like, do you have scripts running in any of your workflows?
Only one, but it's technically I had only one type of script. So technically I have one with, like, for example, if I want to manipulate data or transform it in a certain way, then I will use a simple JavaScript to do that. I don't use it as often, so it's usually more if I want to manipulate the data in a specific way. Let's say regex, which is like detecting words in a sentence. If I'm not using AI, if I want to save money on token, so I will use it just for that, for like text manipulation. But there's a more complex way to use that I personally haven't done before. But those are usually my most go-to use case when I'm building workflow.
Nice. And you had mentioned you see some things on social media, even though admittedly a lot of it self-taught. Do you have go-to resources or certain like influencers or people that you would listen to learn more about n8n, or what's your learning process?
Yes, there's a couple. There's this guy, I think his name is Nate Hurst. And then I think it's Nate Herc. And then he has like a really good channel. He also has a school community where it's called Automation Society, where he actually like showed different workflow. So I've learned a lot from watching his videos and how it works. There's also John Caliph that has some good videos. And also the n8n official documentation itself has a lot of very valuable information that you can learn from. The other thing is in the open source community on GitHub, even if you're not a developer, if you just search n8n community nodes, you're going to find a lot of nodes that will be super helpful because it's categorized in terms of what those nodes do, like productivity or email, webhook, HTTP, and so on. So these are like really good resources that I will use. There's also library on GitHub of people that have built full-on workflow, and they give you access to the entire workflow. And because n8n essentially what it returns is in a format called JSON. So the entire node that you see in n8n, you can do Command A and copy in the entire node and paste it in your text file, and it will return a JSON. Because of that, it's really easy for people to put a lot of nodes inside of GitHub. So there's a lot of GitHub application that has like a long list of different nodes that you can use that are already pre-made.
And you just got me thinking about the idea of putting into CI/CD so it can actually run some actions when I'm doing a push. So super exciting. Actually, sorry, before I forget, you mentioned JSON. Is that configurable? Can I do Markdown as well as an output?
You can do different output. You can do like text output and decide to return Markdown if you wanted to. Actually, Markdown is a really common format that to use because a lot of LLM understand Markdown and XML really well. So and JSON, especially if you're doing image generation. So sometimes those are like the output that you could go with.
Yeah, because I found Markdown has just been phenomenal for interacting with AI. I use Obsidian for my Vault locally, for my notes locally, and I just have Claude Code running there, generating dynamic dashboards throughout the day for different things. It's been really cool. And I just think the more standardized we can get it, especially something with Markdown with very little decoration to text,
Yes.
it's just been great.
There's actually a really good tip with Obsidian that people don't utilize a lot. So like when you generate an output with LLMs, like with ChatGPT, for example, if you just copy it and paste it somewhere else, you're not going to get the Markdown format. But with Obsidian, if you copy it and put it in Obsidian, it will return you the Markdown format. So oftentimes, if you're coding and you need to, like you want to keep that Markdown, it's extremely useful. So I would say like if you have the Obsidian plugin, and this is not sponsor, obviously, but I think it's pretty useful.
That's so cool. And actually, just since we're talking about Obsidian, slight pivot. I built an Obsidian plugin generator. We're able to have a quick chat with an LLM, and it'll actually output an Obsidian plugin to do your functionality. So like, I have it set up as my CRM. It does all my meeting notes. It does all my episode stuff. And I just feel like n8n might be able to plug into that as well and just really make the system a lot more powerful.
Really cool. Yeah, that's the sky's the limit right now. I'll say like if you can think of the workflow, you can build it.
One note on that for branching. So one input, is there a limit to how many like routes it can take, or do I need to just make new workflows if it's going to be a lot of branching?
I've never reached a limit, but you can do quite a lot of branching. You can do you have if node, you have while node. You can do like so many different branching, and I've never personally reached a limit on the node. I try to avoid building those complex, like crazy node that you see. So I always like try to be very sparse with my logic. I approach n8n the way I would approach an application. So I try to keep it to like 2 or 3 logics when I'm branching out. So I haven't reached a limit yet, so I wouldn't know if this is the limit.
So do you have different workflows with the same trigger then? Like receive email, will that set off different workflows?
Yes. So what I do is in the file I might have different triggers for different things. So I might receive email. Then if something else happens, I can have another webhook that does something else. So that one way to approach it, having multiple triggers on the file, but different approach. Then you can group them and then put like sticky note to say this one does X, this one does this. So that's one way to do it. The other thing is doing a long chain where you can put the human in the loop. Usually the way I do it, I always focus on one very specific workflow that I want to get done, and I keep it to that. I don't overcomplicate it because you still have to think about maintainability. Like if you make it too complex, then it's really hard to maintain. And oftentimes it's for quick use cases that will make it easy to do a specific workflow that I'll be able to transfer to a client, and I want them to be able to understand it. So keeping it like making sure it's focused on its own task, but not overcomplicated, I think is an important thing.
Also, just on the note of the branching limit or lack thereof, do you know, are there any rate limits? Like, could I have it pull something multiple times a second, or are there like request limits where I can only say like, once a second? Like, do you know anything about that?
No, I don't know about the rate limits of n8n. So technically inside of my app 8 nodes, you can connect n8n to 8 nodes. So there are rate limits there in terms of how many requests I'm making, but I'm not familiar with the rate limit of like when you're making like requests and stuff like that. I think it'll be dependent on the nodes and the integration, because different integration have different limits. So I think it most likely will be 2 layers. So the n8n one and then the actual integration that is connected to it.
One thing that I'm very interested in, I'm actually surprised it took this long to come up, is the idea of self-hosting n8n.
Yes.
Have you compared and contrast the cloud version versus self-hosted, or is it feature parity? Like, what do people need to keep in mind if they're considering self-hosting?
Technically, the cloud version has more features. I believe that in the cloud version, I don't remember the top of my head, but like there's I think there's credential that was one of it where you can use. You can use a credential, which make it super easy to actually, like, when, for example, you're using, let's say, OpenAI, and you want to make sure that it goes really easily, you can do that. I often use primarily the cloud version where I can host it myself. Never had the need to host it, but technically one quick way to do it locally, I've used ngrok, where I can just like host it temporarily to test my endpoints. For clients, I've recommended to host it on Versal or Netlify into like an instance or an app or something like that.
If someone is dealing with sensitive data, as an example, is the cloud version safe, or should they just self-host it?
Yes, I mean, if you don't want people or like n8n to be aware of your data, I would say probably you want to host it yourself. I think that's one of the use case for a lot of companies that don't want to share their data with third party or n8n, and they will decide to host them themselves. Yes, the cloud is really good for general use if you want to have quickly access to it and not having to deploy it, and being able to create a workflow, make it ready and available right away so that you can use it right away. I think the cloud version might be more technical because you still need to, run it locally, deploy it, install, run a command to install it locally and all that, which can be very intimidating to a lot of people that, one, are not familiar with coding, and second, not familiar with GitHub, and
One thing that I'm just curious about for you as a builder, as a developer, someone who actually makes his workflows, do you have any recommendations for APIs that you found useful or been helpful in your workflows?
Me, my go-to API for cache is Redis. It's Upstash. I found Upstash is like so easy to and quick to get set up with Redis database. So that's always been my go-to. Sometimes I use it for more than just storing cache. Sometimes, for example, I can store a lot of information on it. So I would say that's my go-to. Superbase is good for databases. For vector, the name escaped me right now, but you could use Upstash probably as well. I think that's about it. That would be like my main go-to that I usually use for APIs.
And just curious, for AI, LLM model, do you have a go-to, or do you, like, depending on the use case, we use a different one?
I think it's the latter, depending on the use case. My go-to is usually OpenAI. I usually go with it, but then, depending if I want to do generating images or generating video, I could do Gemini. Nano Banana is pretty good right now for manipulating images, or I can do VEO3 for video. I've used Grok in the past. I find that X in general can be very strict with the APIs. So from like history, so like I tend to go with like the other, like cloud, OpenAI and so on.
And similar to the APIs, do you use or recommend any external tools that help with n8n?
Yeah, so I will have to mention my own tool, which is 8notes, because it allows you to essentially write a prompt and generate a workflow. So what it can do is that you can upload an image of another workflow, and it can literally copy that exact workflow and recreate the exact same nodes. Or you can just describe exactly what you want to do, and then it'll do all the thinking and planning for you, and it'll generate a workflow for you that you can get started with. And once you have that, you can just copy that JSON and putting that inside of n8n and start using n8n there. And oftentimes it's already ready. You have all the connection, the parameter, the nodes are good to go. So that would really be the one that I use and would recommend. I know n8n is working toward building something similar, but the thing that 8note focuses on is really being able to analyze images and generate workflow from those images really well.
I actually didn't know that you could do a JSON option. So there's that classic drag and drop interface, but there's also the ability to write or create JSON to set up these workflows.
Yeah, so the way those workflows work is that they are actually JSON behind the scene. So even if you look at n8n and you copy a workflow, it'll be a JSON once you paste that into a text file. So because of that, you're able to use an LLM like ChatGPT Cloud, have it generate the JSON and paste that inside of n8n, and it really works. but oftentimes you run into a lot of errors because of context engineering. They don't have all the information that they need in order to build those workflow properly. So what I did with 8node is I spent a lot of time doing a lot of context engineering to give all the context the AI need in order to build nodes properly, the right connection, the right parameter, the right keys. And then now when the JSON output comes in, it's actually good to go and to paste on n8n, and then you won't get any issues or misconnected nodes and stuff like that.
I really hope someone fine tunes a small model on a bunch of successful n8n workflows so we can just kind of chat with this thing and just have them spit it out. But good job with the prompt engineering. Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah. And that's, especially like you said, with it being open source, that always draws a community. So I really hope they come together and make that happen.
I've tried to do it, by the way, but it's just the cost of training your own model was just adding up, and I was like, I'm not going to do that alone. So that's
you need to crowdsource the solution.
Exactly.
This has been awesome. I feel like I've learned a lot from you. Could you share a little like personal insights? Like what workflows have you found have been the most productive for you?
I think the most productive is email. It's always my go-to whenever I build workflow. That's the one that gives people the sense of having an AI doing things for them really quickly. Everyone is familiar with emails, and then you kind of know already how to break down the steps of your email. So, read my email, classify them, respond to this type of email for me. Those are always my most go-to use cases. For clients, the most common one that I've seen is social media. They want n8n to write posts for them, for linking, for Instagram, for posting, for scheduling. So these tend to be the most common one that I see from clients. And so I would say probably those two use cases will be like the most common that I usually see.
And are there any nodes that you wish existed that don't currently exist?
Probably better Stripe payment nodes will be helpful. I think Stripe has did a great job making it easier for people to process payment, but I still think that there are gaps and holes that could be improved. So I would say, for example, like being able to somehow like do payment or manage payment better. So yeah, I would say it's a bit broad here, but I would say payment will be one that I would probably want to see more things done to it.
Perfect. And last question for me. Someone's just getting started. What should they do to learn n8n? What do you recommend as resources or a strategy or a roadmap? How can someone get up to speed?
So I'm a big believer in learning by doing. So I would say if you want to learn n8n, I would say install it and try to build your first workflow. Start by building workflow around problem that you have. If you're not sure, start with emails. It's a good one to get started with. And try to think in flow rather than in tasks. So if you have a task, try to break it down and figure out what are the different flow and steps of that task, and try to figure out how it goes from point A to point B. And again, by thinking about the Legos, that whole digital data, and you're just moving it from one point to the other. So I'll say that's how I'll probably get started if I were to start it again.
Amazing. Richardson, this was a blast. How can people keep up with it? Where can they follow you?
So I'm at Richardson DX pretty much everywhere on X. Also, I have you can find me on my website at richdackam.com, where I have like all my resources, links, social media profile, and everything. So yeah, feel free to send me a message or reach out to me on Twitter.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on and teaching us about n8n.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for listening to the n8n Masterclass with Richardson Dackam. I can't believe it took me this long to actually try n8n. Cursor and Cloud Code have been amazing at rapidly spinning up little scripts and automations, but to actually develop the integrations with the services I use on a day-to-day basis, that always takes a little extra time. There's always extra debugging. So the idea of a very clean interface that I can just easily spin up a prototype and see how it goes before I pull it into my system sounds very appealing. I'm curious, have you used n8n? If not, has this episode won you over? And if you have, what workflows do you like? On the Tool Use Discord server, we're sharing some n8n workflows with each other, so by all means, come and join us and share your insight, learn from the community. And I really want to give a shout out to Richardson for coming on this episode and teaching us from his experience. Try out his tool, check out his YouTube channel. He's a really good guy, and I'll see you next week.